So mitigation, we'll interweave some more about that through this presentation. Here we're kind of moving on in our incident command structure there to planning, and in particular resources and needs for helping you develop incident action plans when a storm strikes. So let's begin here, Leslie, with a poll. Here are our objectives. I'll let you read them as we're getting going on the poll.
All right, the first question that Andy has for you is, our community uses geographic management units to manage, and just select which of the following. That majority of, GIS management kind of plays a factor in. Tree work, storm damage response, both of those, other municipal work, or none. You don't use geographic management. So just give everybody just a few seconds to respond here. He just wants to get a sense of what resources you have at your fingertips for his presentation here. So it looks like most folks have responded. I will give them just a couple more seconds, and then we will share those results here. Okay, so it looks like a majority of the folks, 38% say they use geographic management units for other municipal work, not necessarily related to trees. 33% say that they use it for both tree work and storm damage. 17% say they don't use geographic information at all for their management. And then 4% tree work only, and 8% for storm damage response.
Okay, great to know. You can see I'm going to be stressing the importance of utilizing tree storm damage management units for helping you manage a storm event. So that's great to know, and get a perspective of everybody as they're looking at this presentation. Leslie, number 2.
All right, the second one Andy's provided is asking if your community uses a certified tree care professional to assess your public trees. We had something similar to this, kind of similar to this previously, but yes, no, I'm not sure. Do your best response here for if you use a certified arborist or another certified tree care professional to assess your public trees. Give everybody just a few seconds here to respond, getting some good responses. All right, and I think we've got most everybody responding, so I'm going to go ahead and close, and we'll share those results. 67% of you say that yes, you do use a certified tree care professional to assess your public trees. 19% say no, and 14% are not sure. Apologize for that typo.
Well, that's great to hear. I always say that folks should recognize their limitations. I think Jennifer shared some information about looking at obvious defects so you don't need a whole lot of training, but recognizing when you need professional assistance and is important. And we're trying to give you the tools to identify that, and also how to find that works. So, all right, I think we have one more, right, Leslie?
Nope, that's all I have.
Oh, I got ahead of myself. Okay. So moving on here, we want to develop an implement management plan, storm units, and then we're going to talk about some resources, storm damage assessment, and then select these assessments you'll utilize and who will complete them. Part of what we talked a little bit. So as I asked, do you use management units? Storm damage may be spread across your community. It could be widespread, and it could be significant or not significant. Essentially, a management unit, we have a large geographic area here, and we're looking at our friends out in Sanford here. So a geographic management unit is going to divide a large geographic area into smaller areas. And if there's a lot of work in these areas, breaking it down into smaller numbers of tasks to be completed. So you can realize very quickly some efficiencies in work management. So I'm saying develop or select management units that you are going to use in a storm event. It's certainly also a tool in urban forest management. But your simplest could be simply dividing your community into 4 quadrants and taking natural features such as 87, 421 here, dividing east, west, north, south, and perhaps another route, so that you have 4 quadrants and any work can be organized and distributed in that area. So those big areas would be the simplest, and if it's not a huge event, using a simple quadrant basis could be enough to manage that event. As damage gets more and the number of tasks increase, if we increase the number of management units, we therefore reduce the number of tasks that need to be completed in that area. So storm damage management units should be a smaller unit. And again, showing our friends here in Sanford, use these for storm management unit. There's 5 of them. You see they're geographical, obviously, but they also use it for patching, leaf and limb pickup, what we're kind of talking about, but also for snow removal routes. So work is again completed and identified and completed by management unit. So important fact is to select units that are familiar throughout the community. Ideally, well, one, each city department is going to know those units, but also as you're notifying the public or other agencies about work progress, they're going to know. Say we are working in Sanford route number 1, doing cleanup and expect to have that done on such and such a day. So aside from helping you manage that process, it becomes a tool to identify the public and other agencies about work. A subset of this is you should take a look at your critical infrastructure routes and facilities. And here again, looking at our friends in Sanford, I just kind of popped up on Google to give you a flavor of what you want to look for. Certainly we want to know about healthcare centers, government centers, perhaps storm shelters. Also, what are the critical roadways to get to and from these particular facilities? So in a severe event, identifying these critical infrastructure routes and facilities, you would want to get out and survey those particular routes first, and assign resources to cleaning those routes first before you move into addressing residential streets. And for obvious reasons, if we can't get resources to the folks, we can't help. So, and for obvious reasons, medical and government facilities are going to be the most important. So those 2 management units. James mentioned about debris management. We are not talking about debris management a whole lot in this. It is really a cleanup activity, but you certainly should identify potential sites for debris management. I'm not going to go into it any more than that. James's resource at the Public Safety Emergency Management website is a great one. So check with that and recognize that would be a good step to have in place, is a good step to have in place beforehand too. Okay, so storm damage tree management units in place, right? So let's get into tree damage assessments. And really we have some readiness assessments and response assessments. And readiness assessments, Jennifer just talked about mitigation. And the best way to address that is through a tree risk inventory. And I gave you some options in terms of getting contracts, but hiring a professional to systematically look at potential risk trees across your community and then address those risks. And if you must focus on the arterial or your critical infrastructure routes and facilities, and take care of those risk trees before an event. It's going to mitigate their damage. We're going to touch on a sample inventory. I'm going to leave canopy cover assessments for Joe Joyner, who'll be speaking on Thursday. We're going to kind of focus a bit here on your response assessments, what you should look to have. Initial assessments, really taking care of hazards, and then later on a tree damage inventory. So readiness assessment. This is a tool doing a sample inventory of your community, roughly 3 to 6% depending on your size of the community. You would do random samples of both the street trees and public trees, and do this before an event. We're going to get some, good data about numbers of trees, and distribution across your community. Health and management needs of those trees. The risk trees, for example, here in this case, this sample says we've got roughly 78 removals estimated. Also, reduction pruning is going to be for risk type work, 358. So those are certainly an indication where we've got a significant number of risk trees that should be addressed. But two, it's going to show the distribution of trees across your community, and therefore, where damage might be more significant than other areas. Probably, a public works manager already knows that, but this data is going to help confirm that. The other advantage of this is you can then do a resampling of these units, these plots after a storm event, and get pretty quick storm damage estimates and distribution and even volume estimates, debris volume estimates after a storm strikes. And we talk about some of the assessments. This would be a really good tool for a comprehensive initial storm damage assessment that FEMA might ask for in a significant event. It's really quick and easy, and it's already pre-set up. Okay, so let's discuss response tree damage assessments and initial assessments. So storm strikes, your on-call person gets the first few calls, or many are coming in. You need to go out and take a quick assessment on to quantify that damage and what your initial resource needs are going to be to respond to that event. Now, who can do this? Well, I think certainly it has to be somebody that's knowledgeable in community emergency work and response, and certainly somebody who's somewhat knowledgeable in tree operations, in the sense of knowing what resources will be needed to bring to bear to the event. So that initial assessment is done. It could be your team leader. Certainly you're going to bring your team leader in shortly after to really then make what is the next initial assessment. And this is what we call an event classification. And James talked about disaster response. And I'm just going to share, there's national and state protocols that type events. And I'm not going to read this to you, but they really class them type 1 on up to 3, and geographic scale, resources required to respond to the event. And the other critical thing is that it mobilizes the instant command system and the resources, calls them up immediately, based on that type. So a type 1 for the state is, as it says, more localized or isolated, and the state can handle it without assistance outside. As you move down to type 3s, such as regional hurricanes, clearly that damage is widespread, devastating, and catastrophic, and we need more help. So creating this, what I'm suggesting is that you do the same thing for your community. I did that in Rochester. It quickly says, create some simple tree damage event class I choose the word event class, not to be confused with types. And just quite simply, class 1, we can handle it by our forestry team alone. Class 2 might be, we've got to bring to bear all of our community resources and perhaps some few outside. Class 3 is that big one. Boy, we're going to need regional and state assistance. So after that first initial assessment, get a pretty good idea, classify it, communicate it to, and call up resources to each one of those levels. This is going to communicate the scale quickly of the event to everyone. And within these processes, include what you're going to mobilize to respond to the event, and is going to mobilize a particular response plan, which we will talk about on Thursday. Simple thing, and quickly communicates where everybody stands and what we need to bring to bear. Okay. So what types of assessments need to be done? Well, immediately we need to address hazardous. Jennifer talked about risk and hazard. We all know the first step is to address what hazards and public safety and take care of those first. Cleanup comes a little later, but other than access for trees, we need to look at how we mitigate what hazards there are out there. We're getting calls from the public or their agencies. We need to inspect and assess this work and what resources may be needed. And this can be a lot, or it's, again, based on scale. It's just a matter of inspecting each of these and quickly we know what resources we need. In multi-call events, you're going to need to prioritize this work because there's going to be a lot of work. Some can wait. Some needs to be taken care of immediately or as soon as possible, excuse me. And then this information would be passed on to planning for dispatching based on those priorities. So certainly, I'm sure you've read here, the one caveat can be certainly somebody with experience, a little bit of experience identifying hazards and what it takes to get a tree crew to get a tree off a house, for example, can perform that. But some assessments may require a certified tree professional for advice and assessing tree risk. Certainly, as we move later in terms of long-range management decisions, that will be a case. So, Jennifer talked a bit about an inspection process, and we're going to talk about this a bit here, but we are focusing on tree damage assessment. And learn more, as I say, we're going to have a storm damage tree assessment, BMP, that walks you through the whole process. We first talk about incident situational awareness, then we're looking strictly at hazard remediation, and then finally, crown loss, which is really long-term management decisions on whether this tree is worth preserving or not. Today, we're going to focus on the hazard remediation, and we'll talk on Thursday about crown loss mitigation. So in that case, you're going to need a qualified inspector. Jennifer mentioned the inspection process. So anyone who is performing an inspection should do it in a consistent process so you do not miss anything. And suggestion is standing back from various vantage points, taking an overview. Start at the roots, work your way on up to the tops, and then you may have to stand back and take another overview site. It's a process. Get in the habit of using it. Will help you not miss. So let's kind of talk about some of the common storm damage hazards for looking. And we're going to start with that process, inspecting the root zone. Jennifer talked about leaning trees. We know that trees fail in windstorms. What we're concerned with, obviously, those that may be still standing and not failing. And first, what you see over here on the left, excuse me, is sort of getting a degree of measure. Trees get over 30 degrees, they say there's certainly a risk. This tree is leaning, as gentleman mentioned, however, it is self-correcting. So it leaned at one point, but now it is beginning to straighten out and grow straight. So this is less of a significant hazard. But when you see that lean, it says we need to take a look around the root zone. Stand back, I see this is self-correcting, then it may not be in failure at the moment. So Jennifer got into looking at what steps you can take. When you see a lean, look for that mound, get on the opposite of the lean side, literally stand on that mound, jump up and down. If it feels soft or it's moving in the wind, it's going to need to be removed. Or again, call in your professional for assistance if you doubt. But if it's moving, I'm sure you can all say, this baby is about ready to go over and we should take it down now before it hurts somebody. Obvious cracking, right? Doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that tree is in failure and so would need to be addressed. Moving up on the trunk, other common damage you can see in storms could be cracking in the trunk, and we're moving up the trunk now. And lightning damage. And looking at the difference of the two, you can see this is a fairly clean crack. Lightning damage, you're going to have debris and fraying on the trunk. You'll see debris on the ground where the impact and explosion of that lightning strike blew the bark off the tree. So in both cases, the question is this a safety risk? Well, you're going to need to see if these are split into the heartwood of the tree. And if there is, in this case, I am 99% sure looking here that this may be hollow and decayed in there. So if we have hollow and a crack like this, this almost failed, but is in the process of failing now. But a lightning strike like this really didn't go into the heartwood, it just went along the bark, and therefore it may not be a serious concern. But where obvious decay, split, you can see active cracking, take action. Otherwise, have your certified arborist inspect that. Moving up the trunk to scaffolds, again, Jennifer pointed out, common in storms, where we see these co-dominants split, and for the reasons that Jennifer talked about. We now have a standing tree with exposed heartwood, in this case, almost as much as half of it. This standing stem is one, this is all going to be decayed, but it is still a risk of failure, and therefore it should be removed. Same true, you move up, looking up the trunk to scaffold attachments, and here, unless you pick this up, but take a look and see this is actively cracking and splitting. So little we can do here, and we need to immediately remove this, remediate this hazardous condition. So tree removal in both of these cases. Then moving up the scaffolds, you're certainly looking for splits. On the scaffold branches, look around on the other side, you may see it split through. We call these ripouts, where the branch broke out and tore down into that stem. Similar to the codominant stem, the heartwood's been exposed here, and this is now structurally weak. And then, of course, hangers. Broken hanging branches in a tree, and quite simply remove these branches, and we are going to mitigate that hazard. Okay, so you perform that inspection. You need to set up a prioritization scale based on what the findings are to help. And you as I mentioned earlier in your documents, the inspector can be using this form, has been taken to the site, addresses what the priority, and would assign a priority to it. Simply create a priority system similar to this, and I say 1, 2, 3 is what I always used. And essentially, what is the location? So Jennifer touched on risk, occupancy. We certainly know that busier streets are going to be a higher priority. Those facilities, hospitals, communities, centers, those are going to be high priority locations. I live on a residential street. I guess I'm a 2, and I'm not trying to say you folks on a rural street aren't, but in terms of risk, we need to address those high priority locations. And then going through some of the tree assessment, we will create a priority based on is the tree failing? Is the tree on a building? Is it on a public safety building? That's going to push up your priorities. So, or large impending tree or tree part that is about to fail over a road. It can be less risky for a rural road, but it certainly is going to be more risky on a priority road. So kind of a simple priority system to help you then get it to planning, and then they're going to just cruise based. So finally, as your storm damage calls begin to reduce down to a level that is becoming more manageable, if you had widespread damage, say like a class 1 or class 2 event in the example I use for classifying your event, inspecting storm damage calls is not a systematic process to identifying tree hazards. Hazardous damage could be missed, particularly if you're doing inspections that completed at night. And here, in case of a more rural road, nobody saw it, and we know this is certainly a risk. So what we would suggest is in these types of events that you do what I call a hazard survey, where it could be a windshield survey, which is driving. You have 2 people, 1 driving, 1 taking notes. You drive each street, look for these obvious types of damage, do that by management unit, and then remediate those hazards. Then, our hazards are complete, or we are nearing the end of the completion of that, which is called late response phase, or in the early recovery stage. We may be left with standing trees on a significant event. But also, we know we have storm damaged trees, and it would be best to go back out and take a look at those and make some long range management decisions. So you are going to, we do as an inventory of all those storm damaged trees, put them in various damage classes. If it is a federal disaster, they're going to be put into those FEMA damage codes for reimbursement. You're making a decision to preserve or remove. And even I, say, should we replace this tree? Many trees went into a bad site, so it may need to be removed, but I might say, let's not put a tree back here. So the data you're going to get obviously is going to help you develop a recovery budget and plans, and as I mentioned, help with FEMA reimbursement if that's the case. This is going to need to be done by a qualified arborist. So that brings us to the end of our presentations here this morning. I guess we will open it up to any